you for hell even responding to my message. You didn't have to do that on LinkedIn, but I appreciate you.
Thank you for reaching out.
No,
I'm always happy to talk to people.
wonderful, wonderful. So normally if I do this in, a decent hour here in the US, I normally have a community of practice that kind of joins me to kind of listen in. But since it's 4 a.m. now, it'll just be the two of us.
No worries. Well, thank you
Um,
for getting up. I mean, well, yeah, I mean, your daughter had you up anyway, but I
sure.
appreciate you getting up, being here so early.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. So, I want to start you off with kind of the same question that I ask most people that I speak to when I do this interview series, which is when did you fall in love with Agile?
Um, so I think I fell in love with it. Hold on a second. Probably about 18 years ago, I
Wow.
think, shortly after the Agile Manifesto, because I was at university and we had a brilliant professor
Hmm.
who designed the course, and he had to like they had to teach us certain things, but he was really keen to say, look, there are these other non-traditional techniques that
Sure.
have emerged and
Hmm.
that people are looking at. So we were introduced to it, and so when it came to me doing my final paper, my final dissertation,
Hmm.
well, it was more than that. We had to do a dissertation, but we had to actually also go out, find the customer, develop some, specify some software of the customer,
Hmm.
um, build the software, hopefully deliver it to them, as well as writing, 10. I ended up writing like 24,000 words
Mm.
in total with my appendices, and so then I chose to do it on test driven development, and it was around that time that I really fell in love with it. Um, and then didn't do anything with it for probably about 7 or 8 years.
Wow. Okay. So what pulled you back in 7 or 8 years later?
I was working in operations, so in JP Morgan.
Hmm.
So I was moving, it ended up basically moving large amounts of stock, cash, bonds, etc., from one place to another.
Hmm.
And this was during the crash. So when I came into the office one morning in 2008 to find out that the hundred, what, probably billions of pounds worth of assets that we had with all of our customers, which were there protecting people's pensions and insurance policies, weren't worth anything,
Wow.
and that we were going to lose, 50, hundreds of millions of Lehman's going under. And so at that point, but I got through that, and they were very long days, and it got to the end, and I thought, I just don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, it's been a brilliant experience. Now at that point, I've been in operations for 6 years or so. I just I want to do something more,
Hmm.
um, and I've been mucking around automating a process, like doing some coding, just real low level stuff in VB and Excel, but
Hmm.
really enjoyed it. And then thought, well, why don't I see if I can get a job in JP Morgan as a business analyst? It's kind of what I studied at university, so why can't I make that leap? And I've got all
Sure.
the domain knowledge, so I made that step, got a business analyst job, and then quickly after that ended up getting another job in London, working for a Royal Bank of Scotland. Um, and then just ended up getting more involved in technical delivery. So I ended up been doing some database design, testing, project management, business analysis, and then just found that my mental health was suffering hugely,
Mm.
um, because I was as a business analyst and an analyst person in the waterfall style of delivery, you're kind of pressured to get things perfect.
Right.
And it just felt like to me like I was spending all of my time trying. I was chasing something which was never going to be achieved,
Hmm.
and then feeling terrible when 6 to 9 months later the thing was created and it bore no resemblance to anything that anyone actually needed.
Right.
Um, so at that point, I did a Scrum Master course. This was 9, 10 years ago. Did a Scrum Master course, loved it, and then ended up being given the opportunity to run some teams,
Hmm.
and just chose Scrum. And ever since that point, I've only ever done things in the agile domain. And it was that initial work that I did at Royal Bank of Scotland that turned into my case study, that then ended up helping me become a large scale Scrum trainer.
Wonderful. So when you were introduced to large scale Scrum, because a little bit of background about me, I worked for an insurance agency, AAA. auto insurance. And so we adopted Less Huge to
Hmm.
implement Agile within our organization. Less Huge being one of, not necessarily one of the more popular frameworks to scale with. What was it that kind of drew you to that framework and made you kind of jump in feet first?
Yeah, brilliant question. And to answer it in a slightly annoying way, is I didn't actually choose it. That was the crazy thing.
It chose
Um,
you.
yeah, a little bit, a little bit. Yeah, I don't think I was given much of a choice in the end. Once I'd start to be sucked into that little
Right.
community, the allure was too much, and Boswada was too compelling of an expert for me
Sure.
not to want to spend loads of time with him.
Sure.
And I think that's part of the reason I just developed this. I don't think I've ever publicly said that I love him or told him, but it was my love for bars that really pulled me in, right? But no, we started off with one team and we pushed the envelope a little bit about what we were told we should be capable of, and we
Hmm.
achieved some brilliant things and we had a great time. And then it was two teams, and then it was looking like it was going to be more. And then I went to a coaching camp around this time, and I spoke to a person called Sean Smith, who became another one of my friends. And he said, "I said, look, I'm stuck. I feel like I've read every blog, every book, and this is going back a long time. There wasn't a huge amount of information available
Right.
then. So I just don't know what to do. I just don't know what to read." And he was like, "Look, there's this book by two people, Craig Larman and Boswada. He
Hmm.
says it's expensive and it's thick, but read it."
Right.
But I bought it. I started reading it, and I was like, "Oh my word! Like this is fantastic! Like all these experiments are talking about this is the pain that we've got."
Right.
And for every one thing we had done in line with what they were saying, there were five things that we hadn't.
Right.
So I was able to be reading this on the train in the morning, say, right, okay, that's the topic for the day. Go in, talk to people about it, see if it's something we could experiment with. And then gonna go into it, and then going to a meetup and having like Craig and Boz's names kind of raised again, talking about
Hmm.
single product backlogs, and it all just came together. So what we found was that we ended up kind of using less before less was less,
Hmm.
before the website, before the brand, and it was only with then retrospectively looking at it and talking to Boz and said, no, this was very like less like you tick a lot of the boxes. Like
Hmm.
this is a decent case study.
Hmm.
So yeah, we didn't it chose us in the way, and we just followed the experiments. We didn't it was only later, only probably about a year into what we were doing, that we decided to consciously try and apply the fuller framework.
Sure. Give me 1 second. I want to grab my less book now that you've mentioned it.
No
And
worries.
I've got some questions to ask a less expert now that I've got you on the
Brilliant.
line, right? So
Yeah, no, I'm up for this.
so
I can't believe you seem more awake than I feel, mate. I think that's phenomenal considering it's 4 a.m. I'm not quite sure how that works out.
these are my hours, right? These are my golden hours actually. So I actually do my best work as long as I've had the opportunity to get a little bit of sleep, and semi well rested. I do all of my like thinking and my deep work in these kind of wee hours. So yeah,
Brilliant.
that's probably why. So yeah, I've got my large scale Scrum book here, and
Yeah.
if I don't know if you can see that, but
Yeah, I can see that.
it's tabbed up, right? So I go to this organization. This is my first time working with Les. Not my first time hearing about it per se, but my first time kind of really diving deep. And one of the things I like to do as a new Scrum Master when working with an organization and a team is I like to just first observe, right?
Yeah.
I like to understand the way that the team works, understand the way the organization works. I don't give any input. I don't give any advice. I normally tell the team just operate as if I wasn't here. I just want to see how you guys do things regularly, right? And so as I'm observing and kind of understanding less, my manager tells me to get this book and read over it. And so as I read through it, it begins to become apparent to me that I'm probably the only person, with the exception of my agile coach in the organization, who has read the entire book. And so I see a lot of anti-patterns. I see a lot of idiosyncrasies. I see a lot of call outs that the book has about reasons why a less adoption could fail if these things or these guidelines aren't put into place. And it makes me kind of wonder, in the experience that you've had, I see it looks like a lot of your experience has been in financial institutions. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of it.
Um, when you're going in to help an organization implement less, do you find that they struggle with implementing less as the book prescribes, or do you find that organizations don't have a hard time kind of adopting everything?
I think organizations have a hard time choosing to like, adopt or implement anything.
Sure,
If it involves a large scale change,
sure,
organizations are generally going to find it difficult. And I think that if you look at something like safe, often when people start adopting safe and
hmm,
they basically they train loads of people and they really push hard and there's something to follow, it's very constrained. And I think as a consequence,
right,
safe adoptions often end up on paper being looking successful because it resembles something that was drawn down.
right,
um, I think the problem, the opportunity with less, let's say, is
hmm,
that it is consciously incomplete.
mm,
And my guidance was always, I read the book many times,
hmm,
and I was always like, yeah, let me know, let's adopt less. And then I came to the realization probably 2 years ago, but actually adopting less, implementing less, trying to get it working as per the book is just a folly.
mm,
I don't think I've never found to be that beneficial.
mm,
um, because not that less isn't beneficial,
right,
but it's the whole idea of adopting it or implementing it or trying to get it looking like the book.
hmm,
Because then we're just falling into exactly the same trap that everyone falls into with everything else.
right,
We're not thinking, we're not challenging things, we're not looking at the context and saying, well, if less is consciously incomplete,
hmm,
then what are the bits that we right now need to add because we can't make this change
right,
because that's just too much for us.
right,
And I think this is the problem: is that the pragmatic element of large scale Scrum,
hmm,
the softer language in there, which says that this isn't going to work for you right now. How do you work towards it? It's
right,
about continuous improvement. That gets lost because everyone focuses on we need to get to this like nirvana state, and you're never going to get there. So the way that I talk to organizations now is saying, well, like, and it sounds contrived, right? When you start saying, let's understand your goals.
mm,
But that's relevant. At some point, you've got to ask that question. And I advise organizations to not to adopt less or implement it, but to find ways to use it to help them achieve what they want to achieve.
hmm,
Because that way they can begin to understand the trade-offs a little bit more. So there's one client been working with, not in finance at all, something completely different. Um, it's not full stack. It's full ecosystem. It's hardware, software, firmware, a lot,
mm,
and having a long debate with the product area around how do they make it work? Like, do they have to? They want to go for a single product. They saw the value in it, but they were worried about some of the labels, and there's this big dissonance.
hmm,
And so I said, look, are you? Yeah, in the way that you're proposing on doing things, can you do these things? And listed off the benefits of what less would espouse. And I'm like, well, absolutely.
hmm,
That's right. It doesn't matter what labels you choose then. Use the ones that are easiest for you right now. You're going to
hmm,
get the effect that you want. So don't worry about kind of adopting less and adopting all the language because what you're doing aligns with what you want to achieve. You're happy with this. And this is
sure,
a path of least resistance. If we can get on this path, we can then begin to focus on the other more meaningful stuff.
hmm,
So I think for me, it's about using it and being sensible with it, and with particularly when it's less huge, just accepting that it's probably never going to look like the book,
sure,
but that isn't the goal.
sure. Good insight, good insight. When it comes to, I'm going to talk a little bit about difficulty for adoption of change in different
Hmm.
organizations, right? So, from the research and from the work that I've done, it seems like insurance companies, some of the oldest companies that we've got, often resistant to change, right? Some of the hardest to implement change. And it seems like probably banking would probably either follow or lead as one of the oldest types of organizations that has existed for man and would probably be extremely resistant to change as well because they've done things traditionally the same way for a very long time. So, has
Mhm.
that also been your experience that particularly your banking clients have a very specific way that they've traditionally done things and they want to continue to do things that way?
Yeah, I think so. Any large organization that's been around for, well, for many large organizations. I mean, it's important to note that when my first, well, my 8 years working in banking, purely working in banking, were all as a permanent member of staff.
Mm.
I wasn't a contractor. I was firmly part of the
So you're on the
system.
other side.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And being someone who was espousing stuff that was different from the status quo, it got me a lot of attention and served me quite well. But
Hmm.
I was for a long time what felt like one of very few voices, and it was a very lonely place to be.
Hmm.
Um, what I noticed, and from these are conversations I've had with a friend of mine, Ahmad Fahmy, another less trainer,
Okay.
because he's worked in the finance area for a long time as well. Is that organisations had so much money. Any organization that has a lot of money for a long time and has grown, they
Right.
don't need to care about the complexity of their products, the underlying architectures, the organizational structure. You can just keep hiring people, throw loads of money at it. When it gets too complex, break it up into different regions or to different groups,
Right.
right? Or to different regulators, whatever it may be. And you can keep doing that. And then what we found in banking, like particularly, was that all of a sudden there wasn't as much money anymore.
Mm. So they had
And
to
what
get
do you do?
lean.
Yeah, yeah, you have to get lean, but then that's very difficult when nothing that you've got right now is actually oriented to that way of thinking.
Right.
You've been very decadent,
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden, it's like you are, you I don't know, you win the lottery and you buy a house and you hire all these people and you kind of get all these cars and et cetera, et cetera. And one day you haven't got any money.
Right.
It's like, well, but you want to keep all of that. So how do you find a way to keep it? How do you change your mindset? And it's very, very tough. Um, So it's that change that has to happen just takes a long time.
Hmm.
I think, and I don't think big organizations struggle because then what they'll do is, and I'll shut up in a second, but if like one of the big things that I've seen in finance and more broadly due to some of the large consultancies
Hmm.
is this love of the Spotify model.
Hmm.
And lots of the big consultancies are going forward and saying, well, here is how we think you should scale, and espousing the Spotify model.
Sure.
And the Spotify model was brilliant at a point in time for Spotify because their structure, organizational culture, engineering practices, people all co-evolved
Right.
all coalesced at that point. And the same in the banks, the way that they're working, their culture, their people, their behaviors, rules, norms, they've all co-evolved and coalesced at a certain point. And then what they're trying to do is say, well, let's just pop in the end point of someone else's evolution, and then that will work for us. Well, it won't.
Right.
And it isn't about and this is where I think any large organization has to look to create the right starting conditions. Like
Yeah.
what are the right conversations to start to begin to shift things? And I
Hmm.
think that when you look at the large banks, a lot of them are doing better now than they were before. But
Agreed.
these are journeys that they started a decade ago, and only now they're beginning to see that.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about test-driven development. You said you wrote a thesis paper in college about that. Could you, in a nutshell, if possible, explain what TDD is?
Yeah. It depends on how technical you want to go with it. But TDD is a way of ensuring that your software
Hmm.
is easy to understand, easy to extend, and easy to repair. A good TDD ultimately, if embraced fully, gives you confidence and reduces fear in your engineering teams.
Okay. Um,
So
Go ahead.
I mean, I can, and the reason, and that reason is because no line of functional code goes without a test to ensure that it's operating as you would expect.
Hmm.
And as a consequence, you end up with a very robust test coverage, and that's extraordinarily important.
Sure. And so these tests normally, right, you would code and then test based off of what's been coded.
Yeah.
However, in TDD, don't you start from the test first and then write the code based on the test?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the classic little motto was always red, green, refactor.
Mm-hmm.
So you write a failing test. And this would be commonly a unit test when we're talking at the traditional TDD level. So a test which isn't dependent upon anything else, that can run at the same time as other tests, doesn't touch a file system, doesn't need any special hardware to run, very short, discrete, clear unit test.
Mm-hmm.
You write the unit test and then you write some code to make it pass. So you write a test, it fails, it's red. Write the code, it passes, goes green. Take another look through it, refactor the code you've written to make sure that it's easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Because for every hour that you spend writing a piece of code, the probability is that people are going to spend, 2 to 10 hours or hundreds of hours reading that at some point in the future.
Right.
So you put the effort in to make sure it's readable, and then you progress forward, and then you think, okay, what is the next? What's the next behavior? What's the next business function that we want to create here? And we write a test, and it's very small ways to step through the code. It's interesting. Anyone that's done anything around accounting will probably be familiar with double entry bookkeeping. And double entry bookkeeping is a way to ensure you don't get errors in your books.
Mm-hmm.
So you're kind of doing the same thing twice to check it, and that's a regulatory requirement in many countries, I believe. You
Mm-hmm.
can't have your accounts if you're not doing some form of double entry bookkeeping, because your accounts need to be correct. TDD is the equivalent for code, because we're always trying to make sure that it's much like climbing. You're always kind of putting something in the mountain, so that if you fall down, you're not going to go right down to the bottom.
Right.
And with TDD and the extension to that, acceptance test driven development, which is probably easier for people to implement. I mean, they're incredibly robust ways to go about creating a software product.
So how popular was TDD at the time that you wrote your thesis?
There was one book. I think maybe two. There was the original book by Kent Beck, I believe, Test-Driven Development, which sadly my original copy has disappeared for the annals of time. But there was one book. There was one book, and that was it. And maybe two. So there wasn't a lot of guidance on it. The internet wasn't up to much at that point in time.
Sure.
We're talking about the early noughties, probably. It would have been, probably like 2002, 2003, perhaps. So there wasn't a huge amount out there. So my writing about it and then trying to use it for my dissertation, I found really challenging. I had no mentor, I had no guide. I'm not even sure how useful Google was back then, but I wasn't. I fumbled my way through it. And by fumbling my way through it, actually, what it ended up becoming more like was acceptance test-driven development. Because what I found was that my development skills at that point in PHP, which was a language that I had chosen to use, because of where my degree was partially kind of focused on computer science, we didn't really go into they didn't teach us unit testing, for example. So I had to teach that myself. And what I found was that I really struggled to write the tests at a very granular level. So what happened was it then began to evolve into automated tests, which were much more from a customer level rather than at that very low level. So it kind of morphed and evolved into acceptance test-driven development, which wasn't something that the people marking my dissertation picked up on. And it wasn't something that I really realized until I met and spent time with Gorko Adzik. I can't think what year that was now, 2012, maybe 2011. And then I was like, okay, right. Specification by example is fantastic. Acceptance test-driven development is fantastic. And I think that's what I ended up doing a lot of when I did my dissertation.
And so it's much more common now, but how difficult has it been to get organizations to adopt TDD?
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Incredibly difficult. It's not taught in colleges that much, I don't think. It's not taught in schools, even though we are encouraging more children to learn programming.
Right. No
children are taught OO principles. No children are taught how to write a sort of test or test-driven development. So so I think we haven't got the pipeline of people coming through. Right. I found that there's always a handful of people in any organization that love it. And then the vast majority of people find it a big challenge because they it's a behavior change.
Hmm.
You're fundamentally changing your behavior.
Right.
And that's hard, especially the older that we get, the harder it becomes. So when
Exactly.
you've got a really seasoned programmer who has
Hmm.
done really well for their career, has written brilliant software, and then they're feeling pressurized to embrace test-driven development, they don't really see the point. Like, it's hard for them to change their behaviors. So I
Especially
think
pressured
that
by some young kids coming into the organization with this new stuff.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't feel, I was the young kid once.
Right.
I don't feel like a young kid anymore. I'm 40 now. I think I get the right to call myself old. Or older. But no, I think, and this is the again, this is the part of the challenge. I think I always found, also referencing back to your previous question around the big banks, I found too many organizations had too many senior people who had never written a line of code in their life,
Mm,
who didn't understand actually that a software architecture isn't something that is written on a PowerPoint and then
mm,
handed to people to go and implement.
hmm.
Um, no appreciation for this.
Right.
And so then when when somebody who hasn't actually had to go through the challenge of trying to change the way that they do their job every single day,
Hmm.
and they say, oh, just adopt TDD. Well, it's not that simple, because you're
Right.
asking people to fundamentally change their behavior for the thing they built their career on. And
Hmm.
that is that's a huge challenge for people. And understandably, people will push back because they won't see the value in doing it, because they can just get another job somewhere else where they don't have to bother with all of this. So I think that although it's massively beneficial,
Hmm.
I've rarely seen whole groups fully embrace it.
Talk to me about the unique advantage you have of being a developer first and then switching over to being a process-oriented change agent.
Mm.
Tell me about if you ever, well, first tell me about what that experience is like compared to some of your contemporaries who may have not had the opportunity to be in development or be as technical as you previously. And then tell me, do you ever kind of get torn between those two roles when you're trying to coach or mentor new teams?
Okay. So I became more process and people focused because I was a really bad developer. There's a reason why I didn't pursue it as a career.
Was it your
Um,
fault that the economy crashed in 2008? Was it because
no.
of
Well, as you
bad
know,
code you had written?
no. No, I mean, I just wasn't. I love writing code. I
Mm,
always loved it, and I've always loved computers. I've got my first two computers sat over there. I've got my Atari 2600, which is
awesome.
Atari VCS, I think, in the States, and something called a ZX Spectrum. Right,
Okay.
they are my first two computers, and they're there for a reason, right? And
Hmm.
the software program that taught me how to read, is also up there,
Mm,
right? And they mean the world to me.
mm,
But what I found was that I loved it. I just, for whatever reason, never put enough effort in to be brilliant at it. And well, maybe I couldn't be brilliant at it. And it was, my childhood. It was non-standard. I was a child carer. My dad was disabled.
mm,
It was tough.
sure.
I was without anywhere to live for a while.
Mm,
Around my late teens, and it was hard. And so I learned about people, and I learned how to befriend people, and I learned how to try and and get what I need from people and listen to people and align with people.
sure.
So even though I loved software, it was always, people were always a huge part of it. So when I then got more and more involved with things, and when I was at RBS, I did loads of database design, and I loved it.
Hmm.
Database implementation, I used to sit down and when my friend was coding, and we'd work through stuff together, and I really enjoyed it, and it gave me a good perspective. And I think it's one of those things that does set you apart, I think, from your contemporaries. Is that I'm happy to go and sit with a team
Hmm.
and talk about these things. I'm happy to sit with a team and look through their code, or sit with them when they're trying to optimize a build or trying to find out why a build has failed. And whilst I can't get involved with the code, I couldn't take the keyboard and off my own back, fix it.
Right.
I'm okay at asking the questions, and
Sure.
I can read them, and I know what questions to ask, because I've spent a long time, the last 3 or 4 years, studying and kind of following up professional coaching as well. So I think that all comes together. So I think that for me, it is important to have people in your organization who are in the role of coach or whatever it may be, to have some appreciation for that technical aspect, because I think that it kind of feels like, at least for a long time, the Agile community, at least the filter that I receive via LinkedIn, right, seems to be obsessed with working with leaders and managers, and no one's talking about working and helping the teams, or
Sure.
no one's talking about helping with technical practices or looking at team level coaching. Everyone wants the big bucks. Everyone wants to go and spend some time with the leaders and managers who coincidentally probably haven't got any technical experience anyway.
Yep.
So I'm really fortunate that I've had clients and have got clients where the CEO or the CIO or the COO or the head of product, they're the founders of the company. They made the initial versions of the product, and they want to talk about the technical stuff. And I love that. So I can hold my own, but also I know my limitations when it gets too technical. But I'm straight away trying to find somebody in my network who can come and help out and actually, teach someone TDD, because I'm not going to pretend that I can go in and teach someone how to actually do TDD anymore. I'm too rusty.
Right.
I'm not up to date with a lot of the languages, and a lot of some of my clients use C++, and it's a rare and unique person that enjoys TDD and C++. I know. Funnily enough, lots of people I meet that I really get along with. When you scratch the surface, it turns out they're all people who use TDD with code C++ and TDD. And so I'm drawn to these people, but I'm just conscious.
Funny. So what do you think the Agile community needs to do to get back to kind of, I guess we call it maybe like the nuts and bolts of development? How do we get people who are, I guess traditionally people and want to coach up in the organization? Because the thing that we believe or that we've seen is that if you want to drive change or adoption in an organization, oftentimes it has to be top down, because if you try to go bottom up and you don't have the adoption or the support at the higher end of the business, the adoption can fail. So how do we work from the bottom up successfully, or how do we go from both angles? Any thoughts?
It's interesting because that's one of my buttons, the whole top down and bottom up thing. It's increasingly sat very uncomfortably with me, because one, it just further embeds the whole hierarchy in our minds. And I think that when we call the people that are actually creating the thing which people are willing to buy at the bottom, I challenge you to think up a positive phrase that includes the word bottom.
Sure.
It's hard, and we're calling these people the bottom.
Foundation. Foundational. How about that?
Yeah, it is. It's much better. And I think this is important. So I much prefer to think of it, and it's interesting in less as well, that there is this, something I'll challenge bars on publicly at some point, and we have a nice chat about it. But we say top down and bottom up, but then we say systems thinking. So why aren't we just saying holistic? Change has to be holistic, and it may start at the top or it may start at the bottom. But our challenge is, how do we get that holistic change? And I think that for the Agile community to, so your original question was, how do we get back to the nuts and bolts? What I find fascinating about our Agile community is that we've been doing this kind of stuff for 20 years, and there's very little academic research that underpins a lot of what we do. We haven't, there's been no academic rigor consistently applied. And this hit me in the face when I started back at a business school called Henley Business School, and started studying team coaching. We've got two people there that have written a fantastic book on team coaching, and they're saying, well, team coaching is in pre-theory. We can't even say that team coaching is in a theory stage right now. It's pre-theory, because everything we're basing our hypotheses and our theories on, or hypotheses on, for team coaching is based upon family therapy and group dynamics. And they're saying, team coaching right now, from a professional perspective, from the ICF perspective, is where individual professional coaching was 20 years ago. And I was sitting there with a good friend of mine, Philly, and we're like, what have we been doing in Agile community for all this time? we've been trying all this stuff, but where's the rigor? So I
Right.
think that actually, I think what I hope is going to happen in the agile world is that we're going to embrace real team coaching as it comes forward, and that we start working with teams at all levels to help them solve complex problems, and that there's more of an incentive for really great technical people to step to one side and pick up some of the team coaching
Mm-hmm.
mantle. Perhaps some of the reason why we've lost view of the nuts and bolts is because there hasn't been a compelling reason for people who have got those technical skills to move across to something like agile coaching en masse.
Right.
We have a few luminaries. We have people like Dan North.
Mm-hmm.
We've got people like Uncle Bob, or we've got Kent Beck. And we're talking here about a previous generation.
Right. Right.
We're a new generation of luminaries who have got those technical skills that are showing that actually there is something there, because I think that's what we need. How we achieve that, I don't know. But it is interesting if you looked at the proportion of people in our community who have bona fide real technical skills compared to those that have got into coaching and Scrum mastery and do a good job but haven't, I'm pretty sure that it's mostly people with non-technical skills, which is why I've partnered with a company called Skills Matter.
Okay.
One, because I've always loved what they do, but secondly, they're very, very technical focused.
Hmm.
They're always pushing great technical practices and always pushing training and conferences around good technical practices. And that aligns very well with how I feel. I couldn't be a less trainer if I didn't think that technical excellence was important.
Right. Right. What's next for you, Ben? What are you working on? As Agilists, we're always focused on continual improvement, right?
Yeah.
Kaizen. So I know that you said, I think you're still in school in the coaching program that you discussed, but like what other things are you working on to improve yourself, either as a person or as an Agilist in this space?
Um, I I did a talk yesterday on platform versus product.
Okay.
And I think I found that a very interesting topic. So I'm going to be spending a fair bit of time over the next few months doing more research into that, finding people to interview and talk to try and understand to what extent are product management techniques useful when looking at platforms,
Mm-hmm.
and also to what extent are the product guidelines given by less contradictory or clash with this idea of platform.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's an interesting tension there. I'm growing to believe that platforms are an inescapable fact of life for large organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And then how does that work with less? And how do you explain that as a less trainer? So I'm going to be focusing on that for a while. I want to do some work on less huge. I don't think there's enough written about less huge. I don't think there's enough guidance on less huge. So I would like to start to fill in some of those gaps. And then there's two other things. One, I'm looking to give up a good proportion of my time next year, aiming for 25% of my time to give that up to working with charities, just pro bono, finding charities that align with something about my life story and helping them in whatever way I can do organizationally. Also explore this idea around team coaching, and actually what is professional agile team coaching.
Mm-hmm.
For example, IC Agile have done a fantastic job with the agile coaching syllabus, but it's the learning outcomes are very much oriented towards they're not focusing enough on the team as a single entity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at what it asks you to do, it teaches you the grow model, brilliant, works with individuals, but how relevant is that with a team?
Right.
And I think that there's some good work to be done exploring that a little bit more and looking to professionalize agile team coaching. So I'm going to be writing some things and doing some podcasts and getting some stuff out about that in the new year.
Interesting. So where can people, well, before we go there, what is Sheav? Tell me about Sheav.
Yeah, Sheav was for the more astute Star Wars fans out there, people will know that Sheev is the full name of Emperor Palpatine.
Okay.
From the Star Wars films, and that was not because I want to take over the galaxy, just because my wife was getting annoyed that I couldn't choose a name for my company. So surely there's something around Star Wars you could choose, and so I ended up choosing that. Shiva as a company is myself and some associates, and we focus on helping organizations understand how feature teams could benefit them or not, and how they can use elements of large scale Scrum,
Mm,
Agile, Lean, systems thinking to help them achieve their goals. So we do a lot of coaching, team coaching, consultancy, but then deliver public and private training courses around large scale Scrum, so certified best practitioner, and various kind of IC Agile courses as well. So yeah, we're a small company. Yeah, I've got a few brilliant associates who I do some really fun work with, and so we're in it rather selfishly to have some fun,
right.
and help organisations as we go. So yeah, we are. I am more than happy to talk to any organisation about their plans.
I want to dive back into less just a little bit, right? So product owners versus area product owners.
Yeah.
When is the right time for an organization to implement area product owners? Is there a time outside of having more than three or four product teams or feature teams working out of the same product backlog that is a right time for an organization to implement area product owners?
Useful to remember that the area product owners come from less huge.
Hmm.
Less huge is like a conscious sub-optimization of less.
Hmm.
And the main thrust of less huge isn't to make it easier for the teams.
Hmm.
It appears that many teams can work quite well if the right principles, practices, and mindset are involved. So
Right.
this isn't a technical. It's a bit less huge in area product ownership. Isn't to get around technical problems. It's to do with the cognitive capacity of product
Right.
of a single
Right.
person.
Right. It's time.
Um, it is. There's no thing, but it's and if you're in a large organization, we've got
Hmm.
what's interesting in less is that this is some work I have been doing actually, which I need to write up. Les talks about the product owner five relationships.
Hmm.
Um, Nothing's been written on product owner team in less huge relationships.
Hmm. Hmm.
And actually, from the research that I've done, not a lot of people, a few hundred people over the last 6 months or so, we seem to be coming at about 7 or 8 relationships,
Hmm.
because you've got other parts of the organization that maybe you've still got dependencies on. You're going to have HR, you're going to have maybe a sales and a marketing department that aren't incorporated into the product owner team. There's a
Hmm.
huge number of relationships. So what I'm finding is that actually, if you can get to that limit of 8 and maintain one product owner, brilliant. But for me, what begins to indicate that moving towards that kind of suboptimal structure,
Hmm.
how well can this single person deal with it at the moment? If you've got 5 teams and it's just so much that person is really struggling to keep up the pace, and the rest of the organization just isn't changing fast enough,
Hmm.
then what are your options? You break the less rule and say, well, let's implement some kind of area product owner structure,
Hmm.
and you run the risk of whatever sub optimizations you're going to get from that. Or what many organizations will do is say, oh, well, we need a product owner team, and the product owner gets an analyst to come and work with them who just end up doing the upfront analysis. And given the choice of the two, I'd prefer to get on the area product owner route
Hmm.
than to pay someone to come in and do the upfront analysis on behalf of the teams.
Right.
So yeah, for me, I'm reasonably open to talking to organizations about saying, well, do you want to take the less huge structure early?
Hmm.
So do you, or do you want to put this in place as a stopgap whilst the rest of the organization changes?
Want to
But
catch
this
up.
is where I think that the language around using less,
Hmm.
so that to help you achieve what you want to achieve based upon the context you're in now, for me is much healthier than saying let's adopt it, because then it becomes too black and white.
Right. Good, good response. Thank you for that. I think I've taken enough of your time this evening or this morning or
Whatever it is,
whichever,
it's up.
wherever you're
Yeah,
at.
today.
Yeah, today, right? And so I'll close with one last question. To anybody who, technical or non-technical, is thinking about getting into Scrum, right? Any framework. What sort of advice would you give them as they're looking to potentially transition into a role within this space?
Always strive to keep an open mind and just reserve judgment for as long as you can do.
Mm.
That's a pretty broad advice, but I think I think it's important. the moment we feel that we know something, we decide to stop learning.
Mm,
And with Agile, it's just the tip of a very, very large iceberg.
right.
And you can kind of go as far and deep as you like. So I think, yeah, just keep an open mind and be humble. Always be open to learn things from people. That would be my that would be my very broad advice to people.
Wonderful, Ben. Well, we appreciate it. I appreciate your time. Thanks for talking to me. I'm definitely going to probably pass your information along to some people that I've worked with in my previous organization that could probably use some advice or some guidance or some leadership from you. I think your personality type would do well for helping them with some much needed solutions.
Ah, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
Well,
And yeah, if you don't know anyone that's interested, I've got a provisional less practitioner course in time zone friendly. Um, so
okay,
I'm starting at 4 p.m. GMT, so you can kind of do the math, and actually it suits well to your time zone.
okay.
That starts on the 1st of December. So if you know
Hmm.
anyone that wants to come along, I'm happy to yeah, forward on some details and how people can check that
Okay.
course out.
Yeah, definitely send it over to me on LinkedIn, and I'll see if I can't get it over to the people who I think would benefit from it.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. You have a wonderful one.
Yeah, you too. Stay safe.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.